Hello and a warm welcome to the special CGMA CNBC Africa Management Accounting series coming to you live from CGMA Africa Inaugural Conference. Today we come to you to engage in a conversation which affects many across the country and continent with regard to stakeholder relations and of course the future of finance. In an increasingly volatile world where we face several uncertainties on a day-to-day basis and of course need to ensure that all stakeholders are taken care of, the role of financiers as well as financial accountants is certainly changing. What with robotics, artificial intelligence, as well as the digital evolution taking place, we need to ensure that not only are we future fit, but also ensure that we incorporate the future into our present landscape. To help us unpack all of this, we've got a fantastic panel with us on stage who'll engage in conversation with our audience members too, and of course provide us with some insight as to how we can prepare for the future when it comes to finance. Allow me to introduce my panelists who are joining me on stage. From my closest on my left, Mr. Brett Trump, who's the CFO of Discovery, Artie Takudeen, who's the CFO of the JSE, Lee Naik, the CEO of TransUnion, and my co-moderator for this particular discussion, hopefully to wind things up a little bit more when I don't manage to stir the pot in the right direction, Dr. Noel Tagu, who's the Executive Vice President for Academics of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. We'd also like to acknowledge not only our audience members, but of course individuals who are quite important into ensuring that this gathering has taken place today. Buddy Promes, FCMA and Regional Vice President of the Management Accounting of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Mr. Andrew Harding, FCMA, CGMA Chief Executive Officer of Management Accounting, that's of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, as well as Kimberly Ellison-Taylor, who's CPA, CGMA, Chairperson of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, and of course our audience members who join us today for our conversation. I want us to touch on this in three particular angles, which goes back to number one, are we future fit in preparing for individuals in the financial space who are future fit regarding the different set of skills that they come with, moving away from necessarily traditional practices, but how you judge someone on their skills base, their knowledge, their character, to ensure that they have these ethical leadership principles instilled within them to have a broader view on the financial services sector. Brett, starting with you and then open to the panel. Dr. Tagu, you can also take a swing at things too.
Yeah, I mean, a very good question and very key. If we look down into our operational areas now, we've actually got AI and algorithms that tell us what the people would be best fitted for that specific role. We don't have that in the more professional roles yet, but I definitely believe the world's going to move into that space where data and performance measures and other data points will be able to predict which are the best people. For me, it all starts with two questions, is trying to assess their integrity and honesty. For me, once I get that comfort, everything else fits into place.
Can I ask you a tough question?
Yes.
How do you manage that? How do you monitor that? Sitting across Google, who comes in as a potential candidate for that job, what questions do you ask me that actually measure and test my level of integrity?
Look, there are some questions that we've got in our tests, the psychometric tests that we do, where we put scenarios in play, where we ask people questions, and that gives us an indication of whether they would be tempted to lie in certain circumstances or not. So we do use those tools. Some of it is just a gut feel. You can just assess by talking. Most times I feel I can get that sense. But what we do at Discovery is we don't rely on one person to make that. We rely on panels. The person hiring doesn't make the final decision. So you do spread it, so you get a good gut feel from various people whether this person would fit.
I was about to say, if you ask them about speeding fines, I think you might find that it skews slightly to a certain end of the scale. Artie, your team has also changed quite differently because you're not just hiring the standard accounting
if I can
professionals.
change tack to actually what my team composite is. So I've got technical accounting, tax compliance, statutory compliance type people in a team, and they do the very transactional work. Ticket to the game there is technical knowledge, and obviously ethics and compliance is across the board anyway in my finance team as ticket to the game. But that, funnily enough, because of the repetitive nature of that transactional environment, is where the robotics opportunity is in my team. And so I think finance teams in general are very well positioned in any organization to introduce robotics into that part of this, that section of their business first, okay? And that's exactly what I'm doing at the JSE. And then I've got a commercial team who are actually the frontline business partnering team, and they're the strategic influencers and that. And their high EQ for finance professionals is ticket to the game, in addition to those basics that I mentioned, okay? Communication skills, presentation skills, and an understanding of the business over time is important for that section of the team. I also employ an IT guy in my finance team. So he most recently wrote an AI analytics tool, and he presented it to the business. And so what was interesting there was, when we started challenging and started chatting about the results of this tool, what was profound for the business was, and for us, was we wanted to tell it what to give us as an outcome. But AI tools don't work like that. The AI tool follows the pattern and it picks up a pattern and it reports back to you. And then it is what it is in terms of the outcome. You've got to now decide how you change and adapt your business or identify an opportunity based on that outcome. And that was interesting because not everybody could grasp and embrace that, okay? And that in itself is change management and resistance. Then the next thing that I feel finance professionals need to do, which I'm working very, very hard on, is being able to articulate data. So take data, change it into information, but then valuable insights.
Tell us how to do that when you're working off of an Excel spreadsheet.
So I always use, and Brett will be very proud of me, my colleague here, I always use the Discovery Health app. And I say, look, in like one circle, it tells me whether I've met my goals. My Apple Watch tells me in 3 rings, like lots of things about my day, okay? So can you guys please just apply that and tell us the top 3 things that we need to know in a pictorial way, okay? And I use those examples. If they can do it, we can do it from an Excel spreadsheet. And so infographics, stuff like that is something that we're exploring heavily in my team, okay? Because I don't want numbers on a slide and then the explanation of those numbers. I want punchy slides with insights, valuable insights that will influence the business and add value. So I'm now thinking about hiring marketing people in my team.
I'm waiting for an audience to give us a reaction there. I was waiting for the moment to come through. Marketers in finance, something that's completely unheard of. But of course, data also comes out quite strongly here, Lee, and I want to get your perspective. Many of you might recall that a few months ago, The Economist had a picture of data companies saying data is the new oil. And that's a significant resource that companies need to ensure that they use adequately. The presentation needs to be different. The staff and skills that you hire also needs to be different. How do we ensure that we use data critically to enhance our positioning as the finance sector moving forward?
Well, I think data is in fact the new oil. At least we haven't realized that in many regards, right? It is something new, it's foreign to us, like many of the things that are new to us as organizations and as individuals. If we talk about recruiting for a second, you know, recruiting is actually advanced to the point where I would say that in future, recruiting will be done by marketers versus HR people, right? Because some of the things that Discovery uses around personality profiling, that's gone from a human-based process to technology scanning that. And with the prevalence of social media and us putting our thoughts out into the public domain, there are technologies available today that can do in seconds what will take months to do via normal processes. So when we talk about the future of finance, talk about what will happen, there are many things, if we're honest with ourselves, that are prone to automation and prone to industrialization. And the reality is that if we're going to drive our relevance as a human species, we'll have to move up the food chain. And the question is, like Brett and Artie have said, what is it we do? Because the mundane stuff, without doubt, is prone to the automation component. And I think, like Artie has mentioned, as simple as a small screen on an Apple Watch that displays a key data point, if we can start to talk the language of business, and I want the 2 or 3 key triggers that drive business performance or business decisions, and start to think in that language, our relevance will actually change. When you talk about data, earlier Brett spoke about fraud and forensics and how we can find a lot of stuff in that data. That in itself has become a commodity. So we talk to global leaders around the world about churn or fraud or acquisition or disqualification or even your credit score. These are little widgets that come together. And one of the compelling things for me as I hire individuals, I ask less about their technical qualification, because in many regards, I can teach them what they need to know to do their jobs. What I can't teach them, though, is how to think logically about these things. And ultimately, what we want as financial professionals is, how do you take a question, how do you demystify it, and how do you take little ingredients that you may have and you may borrow, put them together in the right recipe to answer the question. It could be part human, part AI, and part nobody cares because it's commoditized. When you put that magic together, that recipe is what your business needs. And that's the point of relevance. It isn't about a spreadsheet and the size of your PowerPoint deck. It's what you tell the board that helps you propel new decision making.
Yeah. Dr. Noel, these are some of the challenges you deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Interesting. But what I've heard you say mostly is on the near future of finance. There's an underlying assumption that you're making that AI is going to be the AI that we know today. And as we shift more from process automation to cognitive computing and neural computing, we move up the food chain, they move up the food chain with us. Where is our refuge as technology moves up the food chain? Begin to look at things like judgment, begins to look at things like even communicating and talking to people, begins to look at things like empathizing with people. Where is our refuge?
Well, maybe if I can start, if that's okay. So a couple things worth noting. The reality is that automation is upon us. It is our reality today in South Africa. In fact, if you're a CFO and you aren't doing things like robotic process automation, you're 5 years behind already. So where is the refuge? The refuge is in understanding what our future relevance as a finance professional group is. It's about creativity, the humanity, the empathy, social intelligence, and orchestration. These are things that, as of today, cannot be done by technology. It's the ability to put these things together to demystify and to concoct ways to deliver solutions that will drive our relevance. And if you ask me, why aren't we doing that yet, or should we be doing it? Well, we caught up in what we've always done. And the reality is that the burning platform that I always talk about is upon us. The AI is coming, the robots are coming, and when they come, are you ready for them? So if you haven't upped your game to learn the language of business, you haven't equipped yourself with non-financial constructs, whether it's AI, whether it's data science, whether it's basic economics and decision making, you actually are setting yourself back from your future refuge. So refuge is there. Have you started the journey to get yourself there?
So I think if you take the basics in transactional type activity out the way and you move up the food chain, in my interpretation of up the food chain, would I appreciate a tool that would be able to pick up improper payments for me? So if you think about big data and there's masses of data, a tool would quite easily be able to do a 100% sample of the population and be able to pick up improper payments. And I would love a tool like that. I'm not outsourcing my ethical leadership, but I am assisting it. So if I needed a tool that would if I could, I would have a tool that would be programmed against all my policies in the organization, and then it must just constantly surveil the ledger, call it, for improper transactions. I would love that. That would give me peace of mind. So that is kind of moving up the chain in the more cognitive type outputs, I think.
Great.
Yeah, I think the dynamics of, the economic climate and the country we live in also play a big factor. And it weighs heavily on me that I don't want to destroy jobs. I don't want machines to take jobs away. We're all under pressure financially. But I also feel a deep sense that as companies in whatever country we're in, we've got to enhance the economy. And so it is a difficult question where that reference is, and because a lot of this would destroy a lot of jobs, and that's what we've got to push for shareholders. So it's quite a difficult balance, and it's trying to find out how do we do this but still create economies to grow? Does this open up other opportunities? Are people still involved in certain things? So it is tricky. But you know, the 10 years I've been CFO, I've never been to a budget discussion where they've said, don't worry, let's just do whatever we want. It's always been a pressure on costs. And now with revenue stopping, you have to use this technology. You have to get involved with it. You have to automate. You've got to use robotics. But then I think we can't just forget about the people. And how do we deal with that? It's a tricky situation. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all, and it's emotive. And you know, it's important that companies grow the societies around them. Those are the people that buy our products. We should be creating employment, not destroying it. So all these things weigh up when you're making these decisions. I don't know what the answer is yet, but they're dilemmas. They're almost like ethical dilemmas that we're going to have to face as we move into this space.
You're quite right in raising quite an important point there. And Dr. Noel, I hope we can certainly expand on this a little bit further, but it also goes back to the conversations and dynamics regarding who you're creating the value for. As you alluded to in your presentation, the results also change slightly, and perhaps shifting away solely from shareholder value creation, but a view on shared value for all stakeholders. Is this also a concept that perhaps is changing the mindset, Dr. Noel, of a lot of management accountants and accountants in the profession? And how do we actually need to implement that as you continue to
Well, I was going to
ways?
ask them a similar question in terms of the fact that we are creating value for all manner of people. And so if you take just integrated reporting, we have 6 centers of value creation, which we call the capitals. There's manufacture, there's financial, there's human capital, there's intellectual capital, there's social and relational capital, and then there's natural capital. A lot of what AI does is focus particularly on the first 2 capitals. In a sense, I haven't seen where it does a lot for human capital, possibly a little bit for intellectual capital, not very much for social and relational capital. I haven't seen a lot of work done on natural capital as yet. But if human beings skills are going to change, there's always a structural difference. Can the people in the workforce now acquire the new skills, or there's going to be disruptions? And my question to you is about partnership in relation to that. Business cannot do it alone. Individuals cannot do them alone. Governments cannot do them alone. And yet if you look around the world, particularly in Africa, the policy space in government does not consider most of these as active things to look at, right from the educational institutions, etc. What is it that you would advise government to do? What is it that you would also advise industry and educational institutions working in partnership to create the new worker of the future who is not displaced necessarily by artificial intelligence but can work with robots? And how are you going to do that? Any views on that?
I think in terms of the bigger problem of job creation, in South Africa specifically, we have a high unemployment rate. We're talking north of 27.7% unemployment in the country. And I guess the question is, which part of the value chain does one seek to address the problem? We've had the likes of Bill Gates that has asked the question, should we start to tax organizations that actually get rid of jobs? And then the question is, what are the taxes used for? Should we use the taxes to actually offset those that lose jobs, or to use the taxes to create new vehicles to create jobs? Now, we've talked about digital education and on the onset of massive open online courses to actually get fast-track education done. But I've seen the likes of Google that has talked about creating 1 million skilled digital people in Africa. Microsoft is doing the same thing. So is Amazon, and so is everybody else. So I think there's a general focus on the shared economy Google Ed talks about, of people asking, let's try and solve these bigger societal problems, social inclusion, financial inclusion. Those are probably the biggest opportunities in terms of commercial opportunity. Because if we're all focused on doing good, RT talked about finance for good, I call it information for good. It's all about doing good. And if we kind of find these key challenges that we as a combined society face, and we rally together, coming together in a new way, then we will solve the problems. Now, the one thing that Dr. Noel spoke about is fundamentally important. For us to start to think about a shared economy, we need to actually let go. We're too close as organizations, whether it's the finance provincial or the finance function or your organization. You want to do everything. right? What if discovery was able to help your organization fast-track value creation? What if you could create more shared value in new ways? So I think equally it's about many players coming together, but if the walls are up, value will not be created.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that at a skills level, what could be done pragmatically is, I think all the educational institutions need to recognize and start implementing education at a relevant skills level. So all the education authorities need to answer the question, are we really teaching relevant or imparting relevant knowledge for today and for tomorrow? And that is at university levels, from pre-primary school to university levels. It also should include the professional bodies. I really think professional bodies, because there's a whole host of finance leaders out in the market today who might make use of this relevant skills training as well. And so that's more pragmatic. But at a structural level, I completely agree with Lee. If we change our mindset to a more partnership mindset, as opposed to being competitive in an industry, if you change your mindset to being peers in an industry, and if you change your mindset to being able to, your vision, and you are driven by adding value to that industry, and therefore the economy, guess what? Profits actually flow anyway as a byproduct, yeah. But if you are values driven, again, to the value-based organization, to the value-based economy, then you start solving for those big social kind of problems. Then I think you get cohesion at a macro level with all the right participants. But it starts with the shift in the mindset, and I agree that move away from the ownership kind of mentality, and then it's really pragmatic initiatives between the three parties, the policymakers, the educational organizations and professionals, and then business as well.
True. Brett, you want to add?
I'm not much. I support both of what they're saying, but I think
this is after they've been celebrating discovery, hey, and some of its innovations.
This is the best panel I've ever been on. I haven't been asked to sort out a claim yet, but education is key for me, and it's worrying to see that it is not changing in the school systems. I know I go to my kids' school and get lots of presentations around what the future skills they need and what professions are going to exist. Yet you go back to school the next day and the next year, and the syllabus is the same. You must do maths and geography. And that's concerning me. So the world is changing, but we're not educating quicker enough.
Yeah.
So I think that's a real opportunity for someone to innovate in that space and come up with a way that with technology that they can impact the school system.
Exactly.
So there's an opportunity there, because we expect our millennials and our young kids to act a certain way, but we teach them the way we were taught. You know, you write exams, you do this, you do these subjects, but then you must program an AI robot.
Precisely.
And you've studied biology and something that might not be relevant at all. So it's an interesting topic.
The Association of Certified Professional Accountants will lead the way in that, I can assure you.
Yeah.
In just a moment, we will cross to the floor just to gauge some questions. So if there are any, please do feel free to jot them down. The mics will be making their way to you, and we'll also be accepting some electronically. But there's a theme that you've also brought up, Brett, which is agility. And that probably speaks to individuals in the room, our members of society as well, with regard to we tend to know that the world is changing. We know that the world is moving. We know that we need to be future fit and future ready. However, the level of agility and flexibility with regard to our strategies and how we implement and do business and even educate our children and individuals that we look to recruit in the future is not changing. How do we do that whilst maintaining profitability in the organization, ensuring that we're still adding to value, and ensuring that whilst we're trying to adapt and dealing with the digital age, who knows, in the next 5 years we could be doing this conversation via teleconference instead of, or an alternative video conferencing instead of being together on stage. How do we make sure that we continue to prepare for the future, implementing the right strategies, but have the level of flexibility and agility to adapt to this ever-changing environment that we find ourselves in? Arti, let's start with you.
Yes, I think the tone at the top in any organization or any structure needs to be set and open to this change and to embracing technology. That's kind of, a basic requirement in order to facilitate change. I think that if any entity, so it can be a professional body, it can be an organization, it can be a policy maker, if they value impact, then there's already a recognition that, for example, social impact is important to us, and so you already create an allowance to your workforce that it's okay to care about the community in which you operate. And then there's that social increase of heightened awareness in social, right? And I think that if you look at the younger generation of today, they're mostly socialists anyway, yeah? And so, and as I say, I'm a value-based person, and that's what attracts me to my employer. And so we need to be able to shift our organization to value-based and be true contributing or value-contributing social components anyway of a greater ecosystem within partnerships and all of that. But we just need to start with being open to that and encouraging that. And then guess what? You attract talent, and you attract initiatives, and you're open to change, and I think the magic happens there. And that for me is a pragmatic first step.
Lee, you want to add?
So I think I fully agree with Artie, but one of the challenges is that all that sounds like it'll cost you a lot of money, right? So one of the challenges for finance professionals, and even in my own organization, we're starting to think about how does one create space to be innovative, to drive value, because that takes you time, effort, and space. And I guess the opportunity with digital is that digital and automation and these robots coming along actually makes you work more effectively and more efficiently, giving you and making more available human capital, cost to allow you to try out these new things. So that's an important thing. For you to create and drive innovation in your organization, you actually need to find a way to fast track the foundational layers. So like Brett mentioned, if we're talking about the tech at schools year on and nothing actually happens, then we haven't taken the kids to the next level. When will they program their first AI bot if they can't use PowerPoint, for example, right? We'll get the foundations out of the way. So I'm a massive fan across my entire career of creating space to self-fund your innovation, because no one's got extra money lying around to make that happen.
Yeah. If you embrace technology and able to, for example, automate certain processes, and that you start freeing up capacity within your team, and then you can apply that capacity to these good things.
Yeah, I mean, it really lies in the DNA of your business and your leader. And in our case, Adrian Gore is paranoid about competition and not staying ahead and innovating and disrupting. And, what works well for us at Discovery is that we've got what we call the lab, and we put varied people, actuaries, scientists, doctors, accountants, whoever in there. And their whole focus is focused on innovating and disrupting. So we remove them out of the core operations, and we got this learning through some study that some of us did at Oxford University. Take them out of there, and all they do is focus on innovation, disruption, technology.
Yeah.
And you create this cycle that just happens on its own. Because what you often find is that you expect the person to deliver on their day job, plus innovate, plus be up to date, and they just can't do it. So what we found that works better is just dedicate a team to it, which they meet with CEOs of the businesses every Friday morning without fail, and this team has to present an innovative idea of something, and that brings the innovation.
Sure.
So you've got to bring it in, and you've got to just be part of your DNA, and you've got to embrace it. It's going to happen whether you like it or not, and if your business doesn't like it, you will cease to exist and someone else will. So you've got to embrace it. You've got to run with it.
Dr. Noel, I'm sure you still have another point you'd like to raise.
It's just 40 years ago for S&P 500, FTSE 100, and the major indices of the stock exchanges. Right now, less than 20% is on the balance sheet. The rest are intangibles most of the time. And yet, the regulatory authorities have not been able to show us how to address that, how to calculate value so that the balance sheet is as close to market capitalization as possible. It's a current problem that we have, and it's a problem that's going to accentuate a lot more because of the digital economy and the sharing economy, etc. that we have. Now, what are your organizations doing to help in the understanding of intangible value and the drivers of value that we must manage if we are to create value and not destroy value in our organizations and in our economies?
So I think that value is defined in the eye of the receiver of the value. I can't tell my business counterpart or my chief executive, this is the service I'm delivering to you and that's the value. She's going to tell me whether it's valuable to her. And so she's going to tell me, well, actually I'm willing to spend very little money on this bit, but here's where I want, a service. And so I think if you take that at a micro level and you extend it to companies and industries, then the same does apply. How do you determine employee value proposition? It's through asking the employees, what do you value about the organization? And I think the same applies to most organizations. I think in today's investment world, though, there was a study done very recently. The average tenure of a shareholder has decreased from, 5 years back in the day to months these days. So then you've also got to ask yourself, well, are they the right audience to be asking about value creation? Or, is it purely just income driven and that's about it? So who is the receiver of the value? And again, I think the rest of the world is. Yeah? So if you are solving for big problems, then you're creating more value, aren't you?
I think one of the key challenges in understanding value is in Artie's point about what is the perception of value. I think there's two ways to go about this, depending on the organization that you're with. Brett spoke about the lab environment. I think in one regard, as you look at your future strategy and your multi-year, 3-year or your 5-year strategy, there are things that you can do to future-proof your future, your intangible sometimes, and almost create building blocks that will be used in some future way of working. So one of the challenges we have is that when you have named problems, you know exactly how to solve them. But when you have a directional solution of where you want to go, but you haven't gotten there yet, those that are able to create building blocks for future use are best set up to actually extract the value from that. So that's an important point. Whether it's data science, where we look at the data to ask the data, what can you tell me about the patterns and the themes you're seeing that could inform future decisions, that has to happen. So on one level, value can be created at the lowest level by looking internally into the innermost organization to figure out what value can be created. On the second level, Artie talks about this perception of the actual stakeholder, what do you want? And it's an important point is that value becomes commoditized really, really quickly. Now, in my view, in the big data game, you almost want to think ahead of the game. Where do you think it'll get to? And try to solve the furthest away problem and start to put runs on the board, getting you closer and closer each day. Because the rate of commoditization is so high. Whether you're in a telco, whether you're in the chicken industry, it's commoditization. And I think the key fight right now isn't about having the cheapest price for a commodity. It's about finding that differentiated value that nobody has and hoping that your speed to market gives you a lead against your competition.
Yeah, makes sense. Great.
Yeah, I haven't got much more to add. It's a good question. It's a difficult one to answer. And what is value? And we've got a arrangement which we use with our medical scheme and the administrator, because they're separate legal entities. And we follow an approach which has come out of the University of Tennessee and used by Dell and others, and it's called vested outsourcing. And that's where you don't just look at price. There's a whole bunch of factors that you deal with. There's long-term relationships. How do you create a relationship with the supplier and the provider together in a long-term relationship? Transparent, and it works very well for us. We work closely together, and we might want to push up fees, they might not. And in a typical supplier transaction, you would just say, we're cutting the fees by X. But we engage with them, they engage with us. We give this and we give that. So that's a model of value that we use to try and form sustainable relationships. And it talks to what our panelists were saying about how do we do more of this? instead of a cutthroat environment, how do we create value? How do we make an environment where all of us can sustain and do well? And others will do better, but we'll all do well. It's not just distracting everything. So there's lots of interesting things out there.
Many moving parts, and many of which tie back to the initial sentiments that were lined out at the beginning of this conversation regarding new partnerships and new friendships, perhaps was the word and the term that was used, understanding the results and outcomes we look to attain, and how we look at things clearly from a different perspective. I'd like us now to cross to the audience to get some questions, and naturally this does apply to you as individuals as to how you future-proof yourself, if a marketer might potentially take your job, and of course, more importantly, for the organizations you lead. Let's start with the first.
My name is Victor Nyasulu. I run a management accounting firm in Lusaka, Zambia. I heard Dr. Noah raise an issue around the assumption that AI may also be going up. And I really didn't hear the answer from the panelists as to what we do. I mean, if we assume now that AI remains what it is now, then we will be saying that the higher end jobs will still be done by us. But what if AI, in fact, begins to take over the judgment side of things?
Thank you. My name is Godfrey Chinasire from Econet Wireless, Zimbabwe. I appreciate that as finance, our role is changing in the space of technology. But my question is, from now, what message do we take home, maybe to our CFOs and our CEOs, to say, how then do we embed the value creation in our performance contracts or in our appraisals? Because when you get home or when you go to your company, you'll find that your individual performance contract used for appraisal is based on the basic function, where we say we want to move away from that and add value. How then can that be embedded in our appraisals, in individual performance contracts? Thank you.
Brett, let's start with you.
Okay, I mean, I'll start with the third one. This is the freshest in my mind. It is just around how can finance people, we measure on certain traditional metrics, how can we change that? I think, as I alluded to a bit earlier, I think our incentive models have been very much on, did you make month end, did you do this, did you do the basic structural financial functions that you should do, where we need to start rewarding people for the pathfinders. So the people within our teams that are innovating beyond what their typical job profile says. So the strategists, the builders, those type of things. Also feel we don't train correctly. I think if you look at a lot of the finance courses and stuff, there's still very typical training. We need to change the training models so our people can grow and reward people that go out of their way to learn new skills within the finance sector. That's a very important one. Reward people that build perfect teams and not individuals. So find people that build great teams. I know it's hard to find every individual, but build a team that is going to take that business to the future. So there's a lot of non-financial measures that we should be bringing into our metrics. And then one of the things about millennials is that they don't stick around. So that ability to manage that rigid or quite anxious career path that the millennials have by moving around. So just that ability to be able to manage that talent. So really make sure your finance people are not just measured on meeting the bottom line or deadlines, but on an all-encompassing view of what we expect them to be in the future.
The rules of robotics like Asimov articulated years ago in the books, is the 3 laws of robotics will hopefully protect us and protect the human coexistence with technology. What we can't do as finance professionals is assume that tech will be sidelined and outlawed. It's here to stay. The longer we have a barrier up, the harder it's going to be for us.
Sure. So get used to it and very quickly.
It's going to happen.
Become friends with it.
Become friends with it, as you said. Dr. No?
For me, the thing to take away today is the whole issue that I've been mentioning on reskilling. So lifelong learning, you've got to have a curious mind, an inquiring mind, an open mind, not necessarily an empty mind, and make sure you learn. So you're learning, you're constantly unlearning and relearning and going through the process, and you're doing it at pace and at speed. And therefore, collaboration is important because you can do all yourself. So you kind of learn with other people and you exchange knowledge. That is very important. But I'm very optimistic on 2 grounds. That humankind has always faced the problem of being dislocated in terms of work by technology. And we've always found ways in which we have repositioned ourselves with technology, and that instead of displacing us, has improved our productivity. I think that would happen. And the second reason for my optimism that reinforces this is that my generation are not digital natives. And so we find these things pretty difficult to comprehend because we are coming from another country that is far away from digital world. The current generation, that is water off a duck's back for them. And so they have the mindset, and this is the world they know. They are going to figure out how to work in this world. They are going to figure out how to do things in this world. And therefore, the thing for those who run education and for parents is not to retrain them according to our generation, because they'll fail in terms of that. That their creativity, their innate creativity, their ability to socialize, their ability to use technology to do different types of things will be there. I'll give you one example. I mean, my son wanted a watch, and he was going for a watch that was more blingy, if you like, than anything. I kind of said, you need a watch. I mean, just get a functional watch. He'll tell you the time. And he says, no, I don't want to use a watch to tell me the time. My phone tells me the time. The watch is for decorative purposes. Now, that's exactly. 2 different mindsets altogether. And my inclination was to argue with him and to talk to him about my generation stuff. That would be sure failure and extinction. They will figure out a way. Let's get out of the way and let them figure out a way. Let's facilitate their figuring out the way themselves.
Sure. Interesting dynamic and theme that you bring up there, because I actually tend to have a feeling that perhaps, whilst the millennials come up with the new technology trends, the soul and institutional knowledge of the older generation also still needs to be shared. So perhaps areas of collaboration too that can be explored, definitely. But Dr. Nola, maybe we'll look at other opportunities for bling to be discovered in the finance sector quite clearly. Let's take the last round of questions. Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Taryn Stephen. I'm a CA and I work at Robert Walters. And what I'd like to find out, so if robots are our future colleagues, how would you suggest that someone like myself, who's a non-millennial and who hasn't grown up with technology my whole life, how would you suggest that we start to understand these new colleagues?
Great question. Fantastic one. Thank you so much, ma'am. Go ahead, sir.
All right, my name is Charles Woko. I work for Startwell Nigeria Limited. My question is to Dr. Tagu. We talk about the future of finance, talk about fast-paced environment, talk about agility and the rest of it. I'm just trying to reconcile this with a situation where we have a lot of bureaucracy in the government sector in Africa, and of course knowing that this sector, this government sector, the public sector, they are kind of the regulators and the policy makers in the environment. How do we reconcile this fast-paced change or fast-paced environment with a slow pace in which decisions are taken within the regulatory environment?
Your question right at the back, ma'am.
It's Adele Westhuizen from the University of Johannesburg. I just want to know, we've taken note of the changes and all the getting our students to actually really think logically about problems and really developing that kind of skills. My concern is just really with practical training. So in our days, we used to do journals and understood accounting entries and where transactions came from. But now, like we've got huge youth unemployment. How do we upskill these kids to actually get to a point where they understand business? Because we came through the ropes, understanding business, the fundamentals of finance. If you pick up a set of financial accounts, you can see where the problems are because you've just over years gained that experience. I'm just concerned that we don't actually give people entering the profession those basics if machines are coming into play. How do we bridge the gap? And what is the role of us as educators and business? What are we doing to prepare leaders, say, for the next 20, when we're not here anymore? Will we have people who actually have an understanding of the basics of finance?
Makes sense. Thank you so much, ma'am. And quite a critical question there, because you can read the financial statements, but if you don't know that this all stemmed from a source document, there's a missing link there in between. So let's perhaps pick up with Adele's question with regard to the practical training and the role of educators in trying to be relevant while still sticking to the traditional fundamentals. That also ties into Charles' question from Nigeria with regard to fast-changing environments. However, regulation always quite slow to pick up, and that's something we've seen in many areas. And as we know, with the example of M-Pesa, which is constantly brought up when we talk innovation, that's where innovation does tend to see the gap there. And of course, Taryn, with regard to her interesting question, if our new colleagues are going to be software, algorithms, or maybe robots sitting next to us, how do we ensure that we understand them thoroughly? Let's start with you, Brett, as we work our way down the panel too.
Perfect. So on the first question, so I've actually never even thought of that. It's quite an interesting concept. I guess, I mean, I don't know how you would relate to a robot. I mean, I suppose I'd relate to it like my laptop.
Hey,
I'd
you've
turn
got
it off
Siri
when it's finished
quite
its work
literally
and
on
turn
your
it on. When I go home, it stays on and it's still working the next morning. It's a good question. I don't have the answer for that. I'm sure we're going to have to be trained and understand, but it's just, I mean, I'd see it like a piece of software. I wouldn't see it as a colleague. I think, I don't know, it starts getting a bit weird when you talking to your claims capturer, who's a machine. Yeah, so I treat it like a piece of software and like that. So, I mean, I don't know, Artie, how would you?
I would put it in the back office.
Give it a hug.
And I would be right there with my customers doing business. Because at the end of the day, we must not take away from the fact that business is done through relationships and people. And so if we can make sure that the back office type, low value add, as I keep saying, transactional utility type work is being done by, what a great outcome if that's being done by metal colleagues. Then you just be the front-facing.
So maybe a couple thoughts. I think the entire concept of what we call talent sourcing will have to change. There's a concept we call virtual marketplaces, which is basically how you serve up these services that you can't see, whether it's conducted by somebody in another region, in another province, in another country, or whether it was by a robot or Amazon.com. As you go forward, we'll see that the commoditized components of what we need to consume will be articulated in a certain way. In the same way, in the tech industry, we call it CMMI level 5, or the highest level of ISO quality. So if you walk into a store and you look at what you see and this is what you get, you have to start to think in constructs like that. Now, if I ask a typical professional, help me understand how you put together a project team for a certain problem, they may say 2 Google Earths, half a bread, and 1 Lee. Now, as you start to think about that further, you have started to think about the job to be done, which is a concept that Professor Clayton Christensen talks about. Do you understand the actual job to be done? Then when you understand the job to be done at a componentized level, you start to understand who's best placed to do the job. If you're crunching lots and lots of numbers, it's not a human, right? All the human wants is the output. So I think, job to be done, who's best placed to do the job, and how do you interconnect these things? So when you talk about the relationship between the technology and the people, it isn't as difficult. I spoke earlier today about a common language between technology and humanity. And in fact, technology has come along a long way. We're starting to talk about something called natural language processing or programming. And you're starting to be able to ask Siri, tell me the weather. And Siri seems to understand the weather. And we've now gotten to the points where one of the biggest things this year, and some of the colleagues in the room have already seen it, is the advent of chatbots in South Africa. You can start to buy products or consume a service by asking technology for it. For example, we partnered with one of the large banks to actually bring credit reports to the market. You could log on to Facebook, go into the Facebook chat button, just say in normal language, "Hey bot, I'd like my credit report," and it would say, "Here you go." So the entire demystification that we stress about is actually not that difficult. However, like I mentioned earlier, to drive your relevance, you may have to make slight nuances to change how you communicate. So I would just summarize by saying that when you think about the job to be done, there'll be logical parcels of work that require humans and technologies. We need to understand what those jobs are and where the best handover takes place. It's kind of like understanding, when you hand over, when you bake a cake, you're not making the flour from the wheat stage. The flour's there.
Yeah.
You can almost think about your work in that way. What parts of what you do today will be replaced by technology, and how do you appreciate the technology like you would a human in terms of the outputs they put forward?
Yeah. Dr. Noel, I'm going to give you the question on the academics dilemma that we had from Adele, and perhaps goes back to, do you use a watch for looking at the time, or do you use your phone? Ensuring that you strike a balance between the bridge that's there, and then we'll wrap up as well with sentiments regarding regulation and ensuring that changes quite quickly, as alluded to by Charles.
I think the problem with education is that the educators of a different generation, the educated are more attuned to technology than anything else. And we just conducted some research. I went to one African country, and I asked the dean of a business school, how do you use technology in teaching? And his answer was, I use PowerPoint.
Oh.
When I asked the students, they had a more sophisticated answer. So we have a problem straight on the go in terms of that. But let me link my answer to the practical and the understanding of the basics to what Lee just said. If you have a colleague you're going to work with, you got to know what your colleague can do, what your colleague cannot do, because of the dependency that you have. And you've got to know where the handover takes place in order for you to be able to do that. So the first thing in terms of that is for, in practical training and education, for us to be able to know what technology can do and what it cannot do, and the handover there. That's the first thing. There's a second thing which has to do with us understanding the basics. Not all of us would need to understand the basics. We need people who would have to understand the basics because they are writing the algorithms, etc., and things like that. But what we need to know is be so clued on in what is happening in the organization that if something is coming to us that doesn't look like what is happening, we'll be able to know. There will be some dissonance between the numbers that are coming and your experience of the reality, and then you go back and have a check for that. And then the third thing I'll say is that we ought to be able to be trained on how to ensure the integrity of the numbers that are coming to us. So there's a whole range of skills that educators can provide in ensuring that data or whatever we are getting is clean and there's integrity. And the whole area of cybersecurity, etc., fall under this. And that is why I'm optimistic that new things will come. So when I was growing up, I washed with my hands. I don't wash stuff with my hands any longer. I put stuff in there, and the washing machine does that for me. I've not lost anything. I don't want to go back and wash with my hands. When my grandmother was cooking in rural Africa, you get a grinding stone, you grind your tomatoes, etc. on that. Nobody does that now. You have machines that do that for you. You don't need to know how to grind. So we might have to leave some of the things that we are hanged up on and leave technology. But we have to have mechanisms that ensures that controls are in place, integrity is in place, that would do that for us.
Very true.
Can I add something, please?
Sure.
I think there's an important point to make about foundational structured education. And I think in some industries we can get away from it. Now, I'm not sure what the answer is actually in terms of, can I see the foundations of finance in the same way I want a doctor to be trained for every single degree and every single year, not to skip any steps, to trusting with the scalpel? The answer is not as clear with the finance profession, but a question could be, could you fast track the acquisition of learning for that? Now, in my very first slide, I had a lady on that had an augmented reality set of goggles on. So let me ask you the question. When you think about the levels of unemployment, what if hashtag data must fall does happen? What if the cost of data is in fact zero, and we could leap ahead the divide between the haves and the have-nots and allow someone to consume from your university the very same education as if they were there down in Auckland Park? That would start to bridge that divide. And as I think about what Dr. Nola said and what our audience members asked, I think that's fundamentally an important point. Could you do what you've always done, only cheaper, better, faster, and in the mode and the channel that we as consumers need? And if that was the case, could that solve unemployment? What if FIC, the World Bank, would give us the money to make that happen? It does provoke the conversation. What's stopping us today from making that happen?
Mm-hmm. Very clear points that have certainly come through from this conversation, ladies and gentlemen, with regard to the changing dynamics, and quite a lot for us to actually consider. But I guess the mere fact that we are having this conversation as to how to be future ready and future fit for finance is at least a step in the right direction. Whether you're doing it for the bling, whether you're going back to foundations phase, or whether you are looking at other alternatives in order to get the job done, it's quite clear that the objectives need to be met. And it starts with us as individuals who are broader thinkers, who not only implement the principles that we look to share, but most importantly, creating value. That's a kind of synopsis that we've come up with for the panel discussion for today. This conversation will certainly continue on the sidelines, ladies and gentlemen, but we wrap up our CNBC Africa panel discussion for today with my panelists taking a look at the environment regarding the future of finance. A big thank you to my panelists who have joined us on stage, starting closest to my left with Brett Tromp, who's the CFO of Discovery, followed by Artie Takurdin, who's the CFO of the JSE, Lee Naik, CEO of TransUnion, and of course my co-moderator for the day, Dr. No Tagu, who's the EVP of Academics of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Not forgetting our audience members for participating with us in conversation. A big, big thank you to each and every one of you for joining us today, ladies and gentlemen.